On the pod today, Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. Senator, welcome back to the pod.
Good to be back. Enjoyed particularly being with you live in Cleveland that day.
Oh, that was a fun show.
It was great, so thank you.
That was a very popular show, you should know. I'm sure it was you, but I'm sure it was also Connie, too. People were big fans. So I want to start with GM. Ohio is obviously going to be directly affected by the recent decision by General Motors to shut down plants and lay off thousands of workers. You've pointed out that the GOP Trump tax plan gives companies like GM tax incentives to do exactly what they're doing. You said this before the tax plan passed. What did you and Donald Trump talk about when you got on the phone with him last week about this?
I first of all, it's always a bit of an interesting conversation. He, first of all, didn't really understand his own tax bill because I said to him, we need your help on General Motors. This is potentially 20,000 jobs in a community of Mahoning Valley is about 500,000 people. So this is just devastating. I mean, it's beyond devastating. People use that word. It's worse than that. In this community that's just recovering and coming back from a couple of decades of real hardship. And so the president, I said, I need your help on our cars and American Jobs, American Cars Act. The bill does something simple. It takes away the tax break that the Trump tax law gave these companies. If you shut down production in Cleveland and move to Mexico, on your taxes, you get a 50% off coupon. And he said, well, how'd that happen? I said, well, Mr. President, it was in your tax bill. And he didn't seem aware of that, which was pretty amazing. But so we take that money and we put it to give incentives to American car buyers to buy cars made in the United States by American workers. And that's 100 different models. So people have plenty of choice. But why should we give tax breaks to move jobs overseas instead of encouraging people to buy products made in this country and give people that opportunity?
Yeah. I mean, it certainly seems like, better tax incentives will help keep jobs in states like Ohio. But knowing that, labor will always be cheaper in other countries, knowing that automation is making more jobs obsolete, what is, in your view, the long-term solution here to, keeping jobs in Ohio, keeping American manufacturing strong?
Thank you for asking that. First of all, this is a president who has the history of saying the right thing to working people and then selling them out to corporate interests. We know that. We know the White House looks like a retreat for Wall Street executives. But here I'll illustrate it with a short story. After NAFTA passed, I flew to South Texas and rented a car and went across the border. And I went to an auto plant, an American auto plant in Mexico. And it looked just like a U.S. Plant in Cleveland or in Toledo. And it had new equipment, clean floors, high tech, everything you'd expect, only more modern and newer than some of the plants in Ohio that are older. And there was one difference between the American auto plant and the Mexican auto plant. And that difference was there was no parking lot at the Mexican auto plant because the workers can't afford to buy the cars they make. And that fundamentally is the distilling down and looking at trade policy. You want to have a trade policy where workers in developing countries and countries that are a little poorer than we are, that workers make good enough wages that they bring their standard of living up and then they can buy American products. So if that were the case, if we had the kind of labor standards in NAFTA 2.0 that Trump's negotiating and hasn't gone nearly far enough yet, if labor standards are higher and wages go up and they can begin to make middle class in their countries, they'll begin to buy American products and then trade works. Then it becomes trade like we have in this country between and among different states. And that's where you want to end up. And that's where we've fallen short on this trade policy.
Senator, in the discussions around replacing NAFTA, are there particular things that you are looking for that might be able to get your support for such an agreement?
Yeah, I had a meeting today with Senator Schumer and Senator Wyden. Wyden is the senior Democrat on the Finance Committee, as you know, Dan. And we talked about how we need to upgrade this NAFTA 2.0. The president, of course, has declared victory, saying this is a good agreement. This won't stop jobs from moving offshore. This will not do anything to raise wages in Mexico, anything. And so we need not just strong labor standards. There's some good language in this bill, but we need strong enforceable labor standards. So when products are sent to products are made in Mexico and they're made with child labor, they're made with among workers that are making below the minimum wage. They have to certify at the border that these products were made under conditions that we support under the values we have about rewarding the dignity of work. So as we reward the dignity of work in this country, we should be rewarding the dignity of work in recognizing it in our trade policy, and we're surely not doing that. So when Mexican workers are paid too little, American workers can't compete. I mean, we can compete with lower wages in Mexico. We can compete with even weaker environmental laws, although we try to raise them. But we can't compete when they're not even close. I mean, our workers are very productive. We know workers in Mexico will be paid less, but they shouldn't be paid 1/5 or 1/10 what they're making in the United States. Then we just simply can't. When you look on top of that, they give a tax break. That whole idea of in the president's tax law, new tax law, that if you move to Mexico, you get 50% off on your taxes. What kind of stupid policy is that?
Yeah. Senator, some of the House Democrats, the progressive House Democrats, especially some of the ones who just got elected, are supporting a Green New Deal. Some of the versions of a Green New Deal, and there's different versions out there, have a green job guarantee. What do you think about the Green New Deal? What do you think about a job guarantee as one way to sort of guarantee employment?
Yeah, I've heard about that. I don't know details yet, but I think I guess I look at it this way. I have heard for years corporate interests in this country and right-wingers try to play off corporations against the environment. If you raise fuel standards so cars get better mileage, you're putting auto workers out of business. If you regulate the emissions coming out of a steel mill, or the stuff they dump in the water, the stuff they put into the air, if you try to deal with that environment in the right environmental way, it'll put steel workers out of business. I've never bought that you play off workers against the environment, because what I've seen is good environmental policy means more good jobs, and the jobs may be manufacturing, they may be distribution, they may be a whole host of a bunch of different kinds of jobs. And for instance, Toledo, Ohio is number 1 or 2 or 3, depending on how you measure it, in solar energy jobs. I mean, people don't know that around the country, but we've done some things that's happened in Toledo. We know that cleaning up the Great Lakes, our greatest natural resource in our country, next to the people in this country, cleaning up the Great Lakes is obviously very important for the environment, but it's also very important for economic development and jobs. And we're on the verge of passing a farm bill that's going to mean a cleaner lake area. It's going to mean better water quality. It's going to mean fewer algae blooms. It's going to mean more good agriculture jobs, because we're being the stewards of the land that we ought to be.
Senator, a lot of those progressives who are pushing the Green New Deal, and progressives around the country, are very concerned about Senator Manchin becoming the ranking member on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. And I was curious if you had including, Governor Jay Inslee of Washington actually called on Democrats to oppose that appointment. Do you have an opinion on that appointment?
Yeah, I don't have an opinion on the appointment per se, but I've talked to Senator Schumer about all this, and talked to some others, and this caucus has a full commitment to good environmental policy. We will not compromise on the environment. We know that we know a good environmental policy, as I was saying earlier, is also a good jobs policy, and that's going to continue to be our focus. That we stand strong in the environment. It means opposing a lot of the stuff Trump's doing. It means supporting what President Obama did on clean air that goes back even before President Obama. He updated it and renewed it, but it means no real compromise on safe drinking water and clean air. And I mean, I come from a state that where people have counseled me, you can't really be a progressive. You can't get a good rating from the League of Conservation Voters. You've got to compromise in the environment. I never have, because I know that good environmental policy is good economic policy, and I want my kids to breathe clean air and drink clean water. And I don't think the Democrats are, as we stuck together in the tax bill and stuck together in the Affordable Care Act, we'll stick together in environmental policy.
Senator, you just comfortably won re-election by about 7 points in a state that Trump won by about 8 points. Not only did you outperform Hillary Clinton by a double-digit margin, you also outperformed the 2018 gubernatorial candidate Richard Cordray, who lost his race for governor by 4 points. How do you account for that? What was different about your candidacy and your campaign?
it's about. Start with this: when you love your country, you fight for the people who make it work, and that really is all workers. Whether you punch a clock or swipe a badge, whether you work on salary or whether you're working for tips, or whether you're at home raising kids or taking care of an aging parent. And I think that when you start with the dignity of work, when you everything flows from that: good health care policy, good retirement policy, better wages so you can have a decent kind of standard of living. And I think that we often forget in Washington, and politicians in Washington forget about honoring and respecting the dignity of work. And I kind of all of my career comes out of that, and all of my campaign messaging, it comes out of that. And I think that when you talk about dignity of work, it's not just a steel worker in Ohio. It's also physical therapists in Berkeley. It's also an IT worker in Tampa. It's also a realtor, somebody selling real estate in suburban Boston. I mean, it's people, because we've seen corporate profits go up. We've seen executive compensation explode. We've seen workers are more productive and working harder, yet their wages are flat, and people don't feel like, when you work hard, you should be able to you play by the rules, you ought to be able to have a decent standard of living. And I think that my career devoted to that and my campaign about that really accounts for the fact that we probably got 15%, maybe 20%. I haven't quite been able to figure out, of the Trump vote. People that voted for Trump voted for me because they know I have their backs. They know I'm on their side on these issues.
So you have said that you're thinking about running for president. In the past, I know you've been less enthusiastic about this idea. What changed your mind, and what factors will you and Connie and your family be talking about over the holidays when you think about making this decision?
It's a hard call. Thank you for that question. A lot of my colleagues have planned to run for president for a long, long time, and everybody talks about any senator running for president, but since the election, after election night, Connie and I started hearing from. We were pretty overwhelmed by the number of people kind of across the country, and activists and people that were party leaders and people that have been energized to wake up and fight back against Trump. And people they like my message. They like the career of fighting for workers. I think dignity of work works not just through the industrial Midwest, where we need to win, the heartland, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, but it appeals to, like I said, it appeals to somebody working in a diner in Baltimore or somebody working construction in Seattle. So how you make the decision, that's just a question of thinking about it and talking to family. And but I got a call from somebody you guys both know who was very involved with President Obama, and he said to me, are you thinking of this because would you be thinking of this if Trump weren't president? And the answer is, I don't know. I just think it's so important we nominate the person that can beat Donald Trump. And not just with a message that wins in the heartland, but a message that wins everywhere. And if I run or if I don't run, I want this message of the dignity of work to be part of the narrative for every Democratic candidate, because I think it's the way to appeal to the whole country.
Senator, when you were on with Jake Tapper recently, he asked you if you were the best person to take, if you believed you were the best person to take on Trump, and you very transparently and honestly said you didn't know. Do you need to come to the conclusion that you are the best person before you make that decision, or is that something you would get in the race and then let the voters figure that out?
Well, I guess the second part of your question is sort of self-evident. If you get in the race, you let the voters figure it out, but you try to help them come to the right conclusion. I don't know. I think that I get in this race if it works for my family, and that's a pretty scary thought and a difficult just a difficult bar to get over for all of us, and how we work this out. And Connie has been very much a part of this decision that will be. Our 4 children, their spouses, our grandkids, most of whom don't really know what any of this means because they're 5 and under. But I think the most important thing is that I really want this job. I know that I think President Trump should be replaced. I start with that. I want to be convinced that I will be the best candidate for this, and then it's my job, if I'm a candidate, to go out and convince others. But at a minimum, as I've said, and I'll reemphasize this, I want this narrative of the dignity of work to be the narrative for any of us. Everybody does things her own way or his own way, but I think that's really important, that our narrative be about respecting work, because that message just works everywhere. It's got to be an authentic message. You've got to live it. You got to understand it. You got to believe in organized labor. You got to believe in workers having a say, whether they're in a union or not. You've got to believe about that this drives the economy. And you'll never hear me talk white workers or brown workers or black workers. You'll hear me talk about workers. And that definition is pretty expansive about people who have been left behind far too many cases because the system is too often rigged against them.
Well, Senator, thank you so much for joining us. Good luck making your decision. And, if you have any announcements to make, feel free to come back on Pod Save America.
All
this
right.
is the place.
Cool. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, John.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Senator.